thank you everyone who's on and joining us today for our Kidco Talk. I'm Nicole Spinner. I work at Kids and Company. I'm on the marketing team here, and I am so thrilled to introduce Jess Dillon, who's here joining us today. So Jess is the Director of Soil and Climate Alliance at Green America, and she's going to be hosting our Kidco Talk this month, which works very nicely because it is Earth Month and Earth Day coming up this weekend, so aligns really nicely in terms of timing and themes that we're talking about. So Jess will be answering many of the questions that we have as parents. Where does our family's food come from? How is it made? What's important to know and what's not important to know? So we know the food choices we make every day have a big effect on the environment. And the good news is that even small changes in what we buy and eat can add up to real environmental benefits. So in today's Kidco Talk, Jess will share her knowledge and insight on how to make food choices for our families while contributing to environmental sustainability. So I am going to throw it over to you, Jess, from there. And if any of you have any questions as we go, the chat should be open. So feel free to add anything there and we'll go through them at the end. Thanks, Jess. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. All right. See if you take, there we go. If you do that and I do that, we'll do this. And then we do this. And hey, we've got slides. That's exciting. So thank you all so much for letting me come and talk to you about the intersection of my favorite things, which is where our food comes from and eating food. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Jessica Hulse-Dillon. I'm the director of the Soil and Climate Alliance, which is a supply chain-based working group. So we work with everybody who gets food from the field to your plate. That includes obviously the farmers, the folks that buy it, transport it, trade it, process it, the brands that turn it into the things we buy, retailers that sell that to us, be it big box stores, be it your local farmers market. We work with researchers who are trying to figure out how we make our food system better, or anyone who's really interested in what we call regenerative, and I will dive into that in a couple of minutes, which really is focused on how do we deliver food that is better for the soil, the folks growing it for us, the folks eating it, and our environment as a whole. So we like to joke that we can save the world with a fork. Really quickly before we dive in, a little background on me. I am a fourth generation small grains farmer. My family has a farm in the northeastern corner of Colorado. We grow wheat, we grow millet. In years when crops are really bad, we grow sunflowers for fun because they used to make my grandmother happy. And if that's not a good enough reason to grow a big field of sunflowers, I don't know what is. So let's dive in. Please drop questions in the chat. Really, really excited to hear what this brings up for you all, what this makes you think. So, wrong button. Hold on. Right button. All right. There's about 1 billion acres. There's a little more than 1 billion acres of agricultural land between the US and Canada. Full disclosure, I am based out of Northern California. So some of these references will be a little more American, but we also work with a number of Canadian companies, and so much agriculture moves across the border that it really is a nice intersection of where we all come together. So 1 billion acres. The acres you see in this picture, this is what we would love land to look like. You see grass, you see trees pulling, all of these are pulling down carbon from the air, feeding the soil. Ideally, you would let some nice cows, maybe some sheep, goats, loose on that field to nibble all of that delicious grass, those delicious flowers, do some aerating of the soil, do some fertilizing. However, that's not where a lot of our acres are. A lot of our acres are in factory production, CAFOs, confined feeding operations, because we have this idea that in order to feed everyone, we have to grow more food. And it has to be, they're focusing on the food and not the quantity rather than the quality. And what we're going to talk about is focusing on the quality and less so on the quantity. And I promise you we'll still have plenty of food to feed everyone if we do that. So in the spirit of Earth Week, which when I was in elementary school was one of my favorite holidays because we got to be outside all day, we got to plant trees, it was a really good idea. How do we create a climate solution? We need three things. We need to draw down the existing carbon that we hear about all the time. We need to stop putting more carbon into the air. And then we need to reverse the existing soil damage that we've done through this sort of factory farming system that I just mentioned to you all, while strengthening the soil. Because if we do that, if we strengthen the soil, it makes those first two sort of work themselves out. So it's really, really easy to do that. Now, we do all of this through plants. Plants have a superpower. And by that, I mean trees, I mean flowers, I mean corn, soy, wheat, sorghum, millet, pick your favorite grain, anything that we as people eat, anything that animals eat, anything that we grow in our yard because it smells nice or looks pretty. I've got a rosemary bush out there, not really used that much, but it makes the yard smell delightful. All these plants are doing this work together. You guys probably all know this because we all took science at some point, but plants pull down carbon out of the air. It's awesome. Now, the second part of that we learn less about in school, unless you've got ag degrees or you've studied this, is once that carbon comes through the plant and it feeds the plant, it also comes down through the roots and feeds the soil. That's the point. That's the really interesting point, if you're a big silly dork like me, is when it feeds the soil, it also feeds all the little things that live in the soil. And the happier you make all of the little microorganisms and bugs and worms and whatnot that live in the soil, the happier they are, the more they can support plants. And they can support plants to grow healthier. They can support plants to grow more nutrient dense, or creating more nutrient value for whomever consumes them, be it a person, a cow, a very tiny bird. And really, that whole process is what we're trying to get towards. And that process is what lets us do things like remove synthetic inputs, which we know are bad for the soil and bad for humans, and make our food less nutritious. So we're really focusing on letting plants be plants. The next slide I want to show you guys this is a very complicated slide, but it really shows a little bit more of what I'm talking about. It's from the FAO, so obviously it's designed for a much more global audience. I don't know about you guys, but I do not have giraffes and zebras running around California, much to my daily chagrin. So what you can just see here is more of what I was talking about. You see the pollinators that we know are so key for keeping our plants growing. You see all of the little yummy bugs and things living under the ground. This is the system we want. Plus or minus zebras, up to you. So what we're really focusing on is how do we create this better environment to grow food for everyone, which then leads us to creating better food and better inputs into our bodies, in animals' bodies, for whatever purpose. Like, don't see any questions in the chat. If you've got them, please do chuck them in there. Love to answer them. So this has all been a little bit about soil and that piece, but now let's get into the food piece, because that's what you all are really interested in hearing more about, is how do we feed our family? I've got 3 kids running around. If you see them in the background, I apologize. How do we get them fed in a way that doesn't drive us nuts? Doesn't mean that we are constantly feeding them because they're not getting enough nutrition. All those small children you feed constantly anyway, because that's what they do. So let's talk a little bit about how we can leverage this goal that we've got in creating this more robust, healthier system that removes chemical inputs, that lets plants really do what plants do best and grow healthy and grow and produce really fabulous food. The first place that I like to start is, if we think about wanting more nutrients, then we want food that tastes better. This is a really easy way that you, as a consumer, as a person who eats food, can figure out for yourself how much nutrients is in this strawberry? How much nutrients is in this carrot? We're talking sort of raw foods here, but taste equals nutrients, and taste comes from this system. I'm going to flip back for a second. That we want to get to, where we've got this robust soil health, that we've got this carbon being drawn down to feed the organisms so that the soil is really, really strong and resilient on its own. It needs less of those chemical inputs, and it's producing the food that we all want and need. This is the system we want. This is one way we can sort of measure how we're getting there. There's a lot of really interesting work being done measuring nutrients, measuring nutrient variance, measuring nutrient density. And that's a big piece of work that we're focused on, but you can also taste it. And that's really easy. And that lets you make good food decisions for your family on a daily basis. Think about what tastes good, what's in season. Again, I live in California. I can buy almost anything all year round, which is very weird. I've only lived here for about 8 months. Being able to buy fresh strawberries directly from the field in April, very, very weird. But leaning into seasonality is really a way to make sure you're getting that bang for your buck, that you're contributing to that system that we want over here, including the zebras. Now, talking about taste and nutrients directly is easy when you're talking about produce. It's a little bit harder when you're talking about anything packaged, be it cereals, be it crackers, be it hot dogs. We go through a lot of hot dogs, be it any animal protein, any plant-based product. So that's when we rely on key standards. And there's some really good ones out there. There's also some real garbage ones out there. So let's talk for a minute about when you're at the grocery store, you're doing the weekly or bi-weekly or tri-weekly grocery run that we all do, what to look for, how to make sure that what you are buying is better for you, is actually delivering on what it says it's got. So I've got a combination of standards here that I know, obviously USA organic, that's a US standard. Canadian organic, those two work very closely together, which is really nice. It makes this a little bit easier. A number of these other standards that you see up here are not, do cross borders, are things that you will see in your grocery store. I can also drop a link in the chat to a report that Green America did, really laying out all of the potential labels you can see on food, because there's a lot. You pick up a bag of granola and you flip it over and there's 7 labels. It's easy to think that, oh, those all are important if they can put them on this package. Yes and no. If it's a true label, like some of the ones you see up here, those have meaning behind them. You can go to their websites, there's a QR code, you could sort of look that up. If it just says somewhere on the package, animal welfare verified, or if it's just font on a label, there is some legal requirement there, but a lot of these things aren't well defined enough. So you can put, you may have seen it before, you see a bottle of orange juice that says it's gluten-free. Well, yes, orange juice should be gluten-free. That's not really an accurate label. Or you see something that you'll see like non-GMO product on something that a GMO variety doesn't exist. So unless it's got a label that you can look up, question those claims being made on pack. Again, they're probably not fully lying, because legally you can't do that. At least in America, we're very litigious. We like to sue over these things. I think you find folks up north are slightly less liable to run to your lawyers, but it's a big piece of work. But look for labels look for labels you trust. To make it even easier, look for brands and products and trust. There's a lot out there that are talking about creating better products very, very loudly. Lots of press releases, lots of we're going to do this in 10 years. Great. We need people doing it now. We need people doing it in 10 years. We need people doing it in 50 years, because that's how we make sure that we all continue to have food to eat and an environment to live in that is not on fire. But here's a bunch of brands that are working on this right now. And there's some great brands on here, some amazing American brands, some amazing Canadian brands that I've worked with over the years. And what's great about the brands that you see on here is they're trying. Some of them aren't getting it right all the time. That's okay. They are trying, they're putting the work in. You'll see some big names, Patagonia Provisions, they are a leader. They're very small, but they're doing great work and they're sort of leading the industry. What's really cool is kids products. There tends to be a lot more transparency and a lot more quality, because as parents, we often care a lot more about what our kids eat than sometimes what we eat. So you see lots of crackers, you see lots of pouches, thank God for pouches, mac and cheese that has been harvested and minimally processed and delivered. Applegate's new Do Good dog, if you can get your hands on those, they're actually really delicious, and they are made with regenerative beef. So there's brands out there doing this. So you can sort of look at these brands, you can think, okay, great, if I see these in a shop, I know these are a good brand. It's an easy way to do your shopping, to really focus on what you need and what's coming to you. Allison, great question. Regenerative beef. So, all right, hold on. Let's go back. All right. Oh, nope. We're going to go to the zebra slide because I like the zebra slide. So a regenerative system is one where everything is contributing to the health of the overall system. So here you see, we talked about how soil health, building that soil health below ground so that it's growing healthier plants that are contributing to a healthier environment. So what regenerative beef would be is cows that are not living in confined operations, cows that are happily doing what cows are supposed to do. They live outside of a confined operation. They might eat some grain, but they may also be eating that grain directly off fields. So instead of harvesting a field, you turn a whole bunch of cows loose on it, and you let them eat it down. And as they're doing that, they are stomping the ground. They're aerating the ground with their hooves. They're fertilizing as they go, which we appreciate cows for. They are also sort of doing their own turnover of the grass and really contributing to a system where you're not necessarily putting chemicals out there because you don't want your cows directly eating that. You're letting the cows do the work of a tractor, a combine, a chemical sprayer. This same goes for chicken, pork, lamb, whatever animal protein that you might eat. And we know from studies that are coming out right now, animal protein, and particularly beef and dairy that come from those types of animals, is so much higher in nutrients, in vitamins, in protein, in all of these things that we need in our bodies. So when we talk about a regenerative product, and let's go here, when we talk about a regenerative product, it's coming out of this system that's rebuilding itself, that's supporting itself with, right now, limited chemical inputs. Our goal is no chemical inputs, but we're still trying to get there. Right now, the only verified regenerative label out on the market is Regenerative Organic Certified, put together by an amazing Pennsylvania organization called the Rodale Institute. They've been in regenerative and organic farming for like 40 plus years. There are more coming. Green America has launched one called the Soil Carbon Initiative. Right now, we only have half of the program up. The company half will be starting later this year. We're hoping to start seeing packages with our label on it. We would like to see it late 2023. It's going to be early 2024, because as I mentioned, in order to get these labels approved, to get them unpacked, to get them printed on the bag, box, can that your product is going to go in, there's a supply chain issue there. So there's more coming. There's also one, you see this animal welfare approved by AGW. That's an organization called A Greener World. They have a number of standards. They're all very, very good. If you ever see AGW, A Greener World, that's a great standard to look for. They're really focusing on different pieces. They'll be launching one. Regenified will be launching one. There's a lot happening in this space. Now, what's interesting about the lack of these regenerative certifications, which are sort of, which are hard to find, even if you have access to, Whole Foods, great local organic markets, is the certification might not be there. But what you can do is you can look at these products, look at the back of them, look at, because if they are regenerative, if they are engaging in these practices that, let's be frank, are more expensive for these companies, but they are doing them, they're growing these better foods, they tell really good stories on their packaging, in their advertisement, on their website. So if you have questions about, is so and so, so and so brand doing this, go look on their website. Again, there's greenwashing out there. There's folks saying they're doing work that they're barely doing. But in lieu of us getting this really robust certification system and making it really, really easy for us all to make quick choices that better support the land, that better support the climate, that better support our families, that's a way to do it. I am that nerd who will sit in the grocery store and see a new item and be like, okay, well, now I have to look it up on my phone. See what it's doing, see where it's coming from. But you can also, rely on some of these standards. You can rely on the company that's making it. So maybe that soup that you've got in your hand, who doesn't love a great can of soup for a really fast lunch? Okay, it doesn't have this certification, but the company has 5 or 6 other products that do. More than likely, you're going to be in a really good spot with that product. The other piece that I think I mentioned early on, farmers markets are always a great way to get products that are going to fit into all these categories that we've talked about. They're going to be regenerative. They're going to be grown in a better way because the farmers, most likely the farmers you are buying them from at the farmers market, are growing them themselves every day. They're hand picking things. They're hand, harvesting. They're hand planting all of these different pieces. So that's a really great way to go. It's, yes, it's more expensive. There's no argument there. But again, if you can shop at a farmer's market, if you can buy local, if you can get your animal proteins from, a farm that's 10, 40, 150 miles away, but where it's coming from, you're going to be guaranteed, not only is it going to be higher quality, it's going to taste better. And again, as I said at the beginning of this call, this is really the intersection of two things that I love is how do we grow better food? Then how do we eat better food? Because all of this is in service of eating better food. So are there any other questions that I can answer for folks? Would love to dig into more of this with you, but I feel like you're also probably getting a little sick of the sound of my voice at this point.
Thanks, Jess. I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
We talk about organic and trying to look for organic. Obviously, that comes with a little bit more of a price tag as well. Is there sort of a type of food or like that organic or those labels are the most important to look for? So if we're going to prioritize organic, would we do that for the meat that we're buying, for the fish that we're buying, for the produce? Is it less important when it's on a cracker? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh my God, Nicole, that's such a great question. I love it. Yes. So there's 2 answers to that. One is depending on how you look at your food choices. So if you were looking at it in terms of what goes into your body, what goes into your family's body, prioritize fruit and veg, prioritize your animal proteins because those are minimally processed. Make sure you wash all your fruit and veg before you eat it because I never ever just hand my kids a container of strawberries and tell them to leave me alone. I would never do that. That said, we have a lot of evidence that even, let's say you grow non-organic wheat and you turn it into a cracker. Some of the ag chemicals used on that wheat will make it through the processing. One of the highest ranked foods in terms of glyphosate residue that is on the market, this is a couple years old, but I think it's still correct, is Honey Nut Cheerios, which are marketed as this great food to feed your kid because they can't choke on them and they're easy to eat and all of these things. Huge glyphosate residue, which is terrifying. And my kids still eat an incredible amount of Cheerios. So there's that. The other piece of it is if you are looking at your food choices from the perspective of what is doing the least harm to the system. And by the system, I mean the land we're growing in, the environment, the people that are growing and harvesting our food. One key aspect of regenerative practices that is some people include, some people don't, we do, is the human impact that it has. Organic is not perfect. I'm not going to say it's perfect. We all know it's not perfect. However, one of the big pluses to organic is because you can only use certain types of inputs, which are chemicals, you are, when you're not using those, you're first not spraying them onto food you're going to consume. You also don't have people spraying them. You all may have heard, and I know this has been big in the Canadian Parliament lately, is there's this amazing movie about the glyphosate trials against Monsanto, the Lee Jackson case, which was down in California, which has been turned into this amazing movie. It was shown to Canadian Parliament, I think this week, might have been last week. It's been shown in the European Union. It'll be shown in the US. Looking at the impact of those chemicals on the people applying them. In this case, he was applying them. He was a gardener at a school. He was spraying these chemicals on the grass where your kids play, which is a whole separate problem that we can freak out about later. But the impact of these chemicals on the people who have to apply them is awful. And I will, Nicole, I'll share this out with you. Green America will actually be doing a big webinar next month looking at a big global glyphosate trial coming out of the Resinsky Institute in Italy, along with Boston University, University of Toronto, and like half a dozen other universities, looking at these impact of glyphosate, which is basically the most commonly used ag chemical, at least in North America, and which a lot of people are moving to ban. So that said, I don't know about you guys, I can't afford to buy everything organic. You pick and choose, you decide what is the most impactful. If I know my kids are gonna sit down and eat an entire carton of blueberries, which they did the other day, I wanna make sure that those blueberries are the best they can get. And then I'm gonna worry less so about the pasta that I'm gonna boil for dinner and put sauce on and they're gonna eat.
Okay, that's really great information. Just as you're talking, someone also just sent in a question. Can you please explain why GMOs are bad?
So there's a couple of reasons. I am going to stay away from the genetic tinkering of organisms because I am not a scientist, and that is a very complicated issue, and we're just going to leave that where it is. So quick background for you all. The work that I do, we actually started in the non-GMO space 10 years ago because an ice cream company from Vermont that has some really creative flavors and likes to wear a lot of tie-dye approached us and said, what is GMO and should we care? We said, well, let's figure it out. Where GMOs are so dangerous, and again, I'm going to look at this from a couple of angles. Where they're so dangerous is in order to grow GMO seeds, you have to use certain chemicals on them. They have been created in this way, and the industry line on it is, well, you use these seeds and you use these chemicals, and then you don't have pests and this and this and this and this. But they're not focusing on how bad those chemicals are because the goal is quantity, not quality, which I mentioned at the beginning. You hear a lot about glyphosate, you hear a lot about atrazine, you hear a lot about 2,4-D, you hear a lot about dicamba. There's a lot of ag chemicals out there. Those come through in our food. The science saying they don't is crap. I'm going to be totally honest with you. The science saying that these chemicals are safe, these chemicals don't cause health problems, that they don't come through in the food, they were done by the chemical companies. They were not done by independent scientific bodies, because when the independent scientific bodies go in and do it, they realize that these chemicals are not good. Now, that said, are there times when maybe we need a little bit of these chemicals? Yes, I work with this amazing farmer in Indiana. Rick has 6,000-ish acres. He used to spray every season chemicals out of an airplane onto his fields. And when you spray chemicals out of an airplane, they're not just getting on the field. They're drifting onto a school, onto a playground, onto a hospital, onto roads and cars and things that people touch and put in their mouths. That's not great. Rick has engaged in a lot of these regenerative practices, allowing plants to draw that carbon down, feed the soil, build their own ecosystem. He went from spraying out of airplanes to now he and his whichever grandkid happens to be around that day. First, they fly their drone around because farmers love toys. It's just a rule. Fly the drone around. They're like, oh, look, there's some weeds over there. They get on their ATVs. They drive out there. They spray them with like a spray bottle of chemicals and take it out. Occasionally, maybe they have to do a little more, but it's using them as a tool and not as a requirement. And that's where GMOs get so dangerous for me. The other piece of that, if you want to delve even deeper into the human aspect of that, is these chemicals, they're awful for farmers, just to be exposed to. They get farmers locked into contracts where they have to use these seeds. They can't save any seed they have left at the end of the year. They have to chuck it. So it's locking farmers into this system where they have to grow the quantity and not the quality. We can also argue about whether CRISPR and other GMO techniques for seed breeding and whatnot are safe. They're not, but we'll leave that for another time because, again, that is not where my background sits.
Thanks so much, Jess. I have one more question, and then if anyone else has anything, please feel free to add. But you talked about, we can do our part by planting, in our own gardens. And is there anything that's, I think you mentioned rosemary, but is there anything that you would suggest? Like, is there something that has the most benefit if we plant? Like, is a flower maybe not as good as if we planting a vegetable, or are they both sort of equally as beneficial to the environment? Is there anything we can do in our own backyards?
Yeah. So things that are beneficial to the environment, trees are great. They draw down a lot of carbon. They provide shade. I have 3 citrus trees in my yard, so I can pick fresh lemons. Those are great. That said, if you're growing a garden and you're investing that time, do what brings you joy, because everything is going to impact in one way or another. Pollinators, anything that's going to attract pollinators, flowers, wildflowers, native grasses, those are great because you've probably all heard the pollinator population is in huge decline. They're dying. They're putting out GMO bees, which is a whole separate problem we're going to worry about later. Those are amazing. Also, growing food is a lot of fun. I'm going to be totally honest. I'm awful at gardening. I cannot garden to save my life. I have killed more tomato plants, strawberry plants than I really want to admit, but it's fun. My kids love it. And from the perspective of teaching our kids, teaching the next generation about food, having them understand that carrots grow from the ground or a pot and don't just turn up in your grocery store, that's great. Going out to visit a farm and see that you will probably have to have an awkward conversation about the fact that the cow you see there is the same as the cow on your plate or the chicken. But so yeah, they're all really important. Do what brings you joy. Make your contribution to the system. It's all really helpful. It's all really positive.
Love that. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining, Jess. It's been a pleasure hearing from you. I mean, 2 really key takeaways for me is leaning into seasonality, I thought was really interesting. So I think that's something that we can all take away. And then just knowing sort of those 6 key labels to look for, because you're right, there's so much out there and sometimes it's hard to know what's important and what's not. So that's good to know. And I see someone shared a link. So
Jess, thank you for this, Christina. Yeah, this is really helpful. And again, I'm less familiar with the Canadian process for verifying. There are processes in place. There's a lot of ways to think about the impact of genetically modified foods. I am always going to come back to the chemicals because what's on here is really great. They're not looking at the chemical impact, the long-term chemical impact of what is coming through in the food. And I'm not going to totally argue, I'm not going to argue with this, Christina. I would love your perspective as a healthcare professional. That is such a key group to have involved in this. And, it also comes down to eating is good. Always eat. Don't not eat because you can't find a non-GMO option or an organic option. eat the food, eat better food when you can, know more about where your food comes from.
Yeah,
Believe me.
I
I consider organic Doritos to be a health food because they're organic. So obviously they're better for you. It's all in how you approach it. But knowing more about your food, knowing more about the impact on you, on the environment is how we do better.
And I like the point that we talked about earlier too, is like, we can't, not all of us can only buy organic. And so it's good to sort of like think about when we prioritize that and when we don't, and, making those decisions, just more informed decisions, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was fabulous.
Yeah, I'll send out a link to anyone that's joined with the presentation and Jess's contact information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us or to Jess. And have a lovely week, everyone, and a happy Earth Day this weekend. And thank you again, Jess, for joining us, and for everyone who took the time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.